Welcome, everyone. Um, my name is Akshat Rathi, and I'm a reporter here with Bloomberg Green. And we are here talking about net zero because we have a global set of climate goals which require all sectors of the economy, from companies and governments to individuals, to eventually reach zero or net out their emissions to zero to be able to control and slow down climate change. Of course, in the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen a rush of announcements from companies across the world setting these net zero targets. And with us, we have an excellent panel of company executives who can walk us through what it means to set a target of this kind, which is typically decades out, and how do you take the steps to get there in the most sensible manner without having to disrupt business in as little way as possible. So with us, we have Jane Ewing, who's a Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Walmart, Jessica Matthews, who's founder and CEO of Uncharted Power, and Dane Parker, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of General Motors. And I wanted to start with Dane because General Motors has very recently announced that it's going to go at least carbon neutral on its own operations. What was it like to come up with that plan, announce it, and what do the next years look like?
Sure, thanks, Akshat. And I would tell you, actually, our commitment was to be carbon neutral in our products and our operations. And in our case, our products are about 75% of our footprint. So that's a very seismic shift for us. And we're going to do this with the science-based target methodology path. So we're going to do it primarily by reducing and eliminating our emissions. And so, with that, for us came our aspiration that by 2035, we will eliminate tailpipe emissions. And that's 75% of our total footprint, as I mentioned. And so, for us, we in 2017, we set a vision for a zero emissions future and have been working since then to get into a place where we're confident in our technology and in the things we're doing in our own operations, as you mentioned, but even more importantly in our products, so that we're ready to set this kind of a target. And we're excited, and there's going to be a lot coming in the immediate term and in the years to come to get us there.
Thank you. Similarly, Walmart has set a similar goal going back a few years, but it also addresses, as Dane hinted at, emissions across the supply chain. Jane, could you tell us a little more about, what are the top goals that Walmart has set and how Walmart is set to go about achieving them?
Yes, of course, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Hello, everyone. We've been working for over 15 years and collaborating with other partners to endeavor to drive positive impact across our global supply chain and also in all of the communities we operate. So we know how critical this is for the world. The fact that the climate change is now being termed a climate crisis meant we knew we needed to double down and be more aggressive. So back in September of last year, we made a new announcement and a new set of goals to really raise our ambition and target zero emissions in our own operations by 2040. At the same time, we made a commitment to becoming a regenerative company. This idea that we work to restore and replenish and regenerate whilst continuing to deliver on our goals and our purpose. And then in terms of scope 3, in 2017, we launched what we call Project Gigaton. And that is an initiative designed to partner with our suppliers and encourage their partnership to remove a gigaton's worth of emissions out of the atmosphere by 2030. So we're pretty excited about both those initiatives and very committed to making them happen.
And Jessica, as a much smaller company than Walmart or GM, but a company that is actually enabling many of the large companies to reach these goals. What have you found to be most exciting in this space? And also, perhaps, what's the most challenging part of the job?
Well, first, I'd like to also say thank you. It's an honor to be here, not just in this virtual room, but during this time when I think for most of us, the things that we believe to be important are finally urgent to a large enough group in the world for us to have some meaningful and productive conversations. You know, I have been very much, I think, inspired by the work that's come before us when we think about the different types of platforms that have been developed to attempt to support smart, sustainable infrastructure development. And that's definitely where we focus most at Uncharted, looking at infrastructure and how it really gets properly deployed and managed in the built environment. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is that most smart city platforms, whether they're vertically integrated in terms of one sort of stream around water or energy or parking, traffic, et cetera, or if they've attempted horizontal integration and thinking about how you can sort of provide kind of a very rigid solution to cities or campuses, et cetera. The biggest thing is that they've always been focusing more on integration versus interoperability. And at the end of the day, we all know as functioning adults that there's a difference between being in the same place and being on the same page. And what we've found essentially is that we have more of the latter, more of the former than the latter happening in these situations. We have quite a few smart products being pushed into smart cities, quite a few sustainable products being pushed into these communities, but we're not actually building smart, sustainable communities because we're not prioritizing interoperability. And so when we really thought about what it would mean to create a truly equitable enablement platform that could streamline the development and management of smart, sustainable infrastructure, we knew that that's what we essentially would have to focus on. And so for us, that meant really prioritizing standardization, the standardization of physical and digital interfaces to streamline everything from how you would co-locate power cables, 5G infrastructure, et cetera, in the ground, to digital twin interfaces that really give you a much more accessible single pane of glass of everything that's going on in your full infrastructure network. So you can start to actually have opportunities to learn and address the costs and the time to deploy and general redundancies that can disincentivize people from making these climate kind of mission statements. And then I think a really big thing is also looking at how we work with AI and machine learning to have a cloud, a true edge cloud that enables all of this as well, right? Instead of kind of saying, hey, here's how you need to build, designing something that learns about the different infrastructure solutions, learns about how an organization is trying to deliver an electric vehicle charging solution, despite the fact that there's all these silos with power, with infrastructure development, et cetera, and then produces something that can give them what we all want, right? Which is economies of scale.
Thanks. Yeah, and in reaching these net zero goals, there's a need for technology, as Jessica pointed out, but there's also the need for transparency and reporting your progress. And maybe Jane, you could tell us a little bit more about what Walmart does to not just set the goal, but once the goal has been set, how you update your audiences and the public about reaching these goals. What sort of reporting measures are taken to do that?
Yes, of course. So we estimate our direct, indirect, and partial supply chain emissions in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And we've actually been reporting this annually since 2006. We also report to the CDP. And happily, both in 2019 and 2020, we made the A list for climate action. And we just heard last week that we made the supplier engagement leaderboard. And for those of you who are familiar with CDP, you'll know it's a very comprehensive and detailed analysis that requires you to look at all areas of the organization. And then in terms of our in addition to our own operations, on Project Gigaton that I just spoke about, we ask our suppliers to set emission reduction goals. And we actually have a platform, a technological platform that they can do that. And then we and they together track their progress. So it really does allow us to hold each other accountable. And then we obviously report those findings in our ESG report and other areas, but we issue that every year.
There are a lot of questions about the role of carbon offsets in net zero strategy. Of course, the net part of net zero is an assumption, or at least an allowance of using carbon offsets. And maybe Dane, you can mention whether carbon offsets, what do you think about them, and whether GM aims to use carbon offsets in its route to reaching carbon neutrality?
Sure. So certainly I think there are roles and places for carbon offsets, and they can be an important way of helping direct resources to the most effective way of reducing carbon in total. But as for us at GM, our goal is primarily to not use carbon offsets, but in fact to achieve absolute reductions through our own operations and through our products. In our products, transitioning to electric vehicles is the most important lever for that. So we're investing significant resources in doing that and changing our products. And then, of course, the way those products are powered, which is energy, is another really key element. So enabling the growth of renewable energy and the greening of the grid as fast as possible is another really important element for us. So as we look, our goals are primarily focused around reductions of the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions associated with the operations and the products we have. And we would view carbon offsets in the very end as netting those things that otherwise we can't reduce. But we're even looking at industrial heating in alternative ways like hydrogen so that we can eliminate that carbon. So elimination is our primary focus.
Right. And Jessica, one other aspect I wanted to touch upon is, even as a firm with a smaller carbon footprint, what is it that you're doing within the company to address the small carbon footprint that you do have? And have you set your own net zero goal as a company?
I think as an organization, we're so small that we wouldn't even know exactly how to really honestly focus in those resources. But that said, it's very much been part of our ethos as a company to be smart and sustainable in everything that we do. So whether it's actually shifting to an entirely remote team, right, and only focusing in on having people going to a physical space for work when it's critically necessary in the development of our hardware systems has already been an area where we're really excited to demonstrate the social, I think, and sustainable commitment that we're hoping to make in simply being a more efficient company across the board. I think that said, where we have been able to track our targets and numbers is really looking at how we can promote the adoption of more sustainable and smart solutions in the broader communities, right? So our team is less than 40 people broadly in a modular workforce, less than 10 people who are actually full-time. So it becomes a bit minuscule to track, but when we're working in communities that are over 30,000 individuals, we start to see the big push there. And what we have found ultimately is that in as much as we're very excited to see the more political incentives around offsetting, carbon, et cetera, we really do need technological solutions that just make it easier, that just make it more convenient to do this. And so what we've been looking at is how do we use data in particular to show that this is in fact the most cost-effective solution from a business perspective, even if we we have a shift in policies and tax credits that would normally be the core incentive that both cities and businesses would have. And so our big goal right now, especially in the city that we're working in Poughkeepsie, is to look at how we can eat into approximately 50 to 90% of the cost that normally goes into deploying things like solar microgrids, EV charging stations, smart water systems, smarter traffic systems, et cetera, and really show how not only is this enabling a more sustainable community, but it in fact is good for the bottom line.
Right. A follow-up on your question, your answer, Jane, that in setting your gigaton target, for example, you also get your supply chain to report on their progress. What sort of resources do you have to provide them, or what kind of help do they ask for in making sure that they themselves are reducing their carbon footprint, which would of course help you reach the gigaton goal?
Yeah, so on the Gigaton initiative, we've actually got over 2,300 suppliers that have already engaged, and we've tried to make it easy to access, and then that it builds up over time. So the first thing we do is we give them access to the platform, and we ask them to set a goal, but then we provide tools to help them navigate those goals and achieve them. So we've actually got goals in several different areas. So energy would be one, waste, packaging, agriculture, forests, and then product use and design. So they can start in any of those areas, and what we find is they usually start with one or two, and then they'll build up to more. And we provide a set of tools. We have regular workshops in the different areas to kind of help them raise the bar. And one example I'd like to call out is we towards the end of last year we developed in partnership with Schneider Electric what we call a Gigaton PPA initiative. So we offer suppliers a way to accelerate their renewable energy adoption. And often these suppliers may not be able to do that on their own, but by combining forces, they can do that, and hopefully it will help give the smaller suppliers access to renewables and then accelerate the use. So as much as we can try and do things that are going to help raise the bar for everybody, we work pretty hard to do that.
Right. And Dane, I mean, you also have a huge supply chain. Are there differences in how, Jane described Walmart approaches their supply chain emissions from how you do it? And are there differences in, what sort of resources your suppliers ask for?
Actually, I heard a lot of similarities, and I think Walmart's been a great leader, along with other companies like Unilever, in engaging their supply chains. And so we've used some very similar methodologies. We've had workshops on reporting. We've helped suppliers understand and have access to tools to be able to do that. Something we found really effective that we did last year was we created a supplier sustainability council. So we have senior leaders, senior executives from a series of our biggest suppliers that meet together and help one another and ask questions, share ideas, share best practices, share learnings. We're fortunate to have amongst our suppliers some really great companies themselves, big companies that lead in their industries and are passionate about sustainability. So, we've brought them together, and we're learning from one another on the journey, and we're seeing, a great deal of enthusiasm and support as they embrace common goals. And we've also asked them to set their own goals, to publicly disclose those goals, and we work with them to help.
Right. And Jessica, in working with larger companies, either to access services, but also either to supply them, what kind of feedback do you get from companies, when they are either using your services for meeting climate goals?
A lot of our work right now has been more in the pilot stage. And so a lot of the feedback is really more part of the development process, right? Our biggest thing is looking at how can we streamline what they're trying to do in the first place, right? How can we create more value and cut costs? I would say the biggest things that have been, I think, focused on over the last year or two, and I think about the work that we've done, not only locally within cities, but even in conversations we've had with, for example, Disney, who's an investor in the company. The biggest thing is really understanding our materials. So, for example, something as small as even selecting FRP, fiber reinforced polymer, as the core material in our physical paver. It's a pretty standard serviceable paver, something you can put in the ground so you don't have this dig once issue. Calculating the sustainability around this, not just because we're no longer sourcing concrete, which is actually somewhat unsustainable when you think about the core beach sand that's required, but also looking at the sustainability and not having to rip up the ground again, and being able to calculate that with accuracy as we think about different projects that might be possible. Looking at even the volumetric weight of the system when we think about shipping. These are things that do come up in the conversations, are very, very much relevant. But we have honestly found that ultimately the bottom line is something that everyone needs to care about. And the sustainability officers that we've engaged are usually saying, I need to present almost like triple bottom line solutions here to ensure that the legacy of this program lives on. And so we've had some fun kind of coming together, with these partners and saying, hey, face value, we're a win, we're an MWBE, we care about sustainability, but we also really care about improving the bottom line on your sustainability efforts. And here's how we are thinking about doing this. And so there's a couple of things we'll be showing actually in a few months, just in upstate New York, in terms of how we're working to enable different infrastructure solution companies within an actual city. But there's quite a bit more that we think is going to come along over the next year or two as we start to get the support from the federal government as well.
All right, we're coming up to the close of our time. So I'm going to ask one final question, and it'll be the same one for all of you. And I'll start with Jessica. Is that what's the one solution towards cutting emissions that currently most excites you? And how do you see it fitting in your work?
That clarifying point at the end was quite important, because one solution is not possible. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I'm the most excited about interoperability. I still truly believe that the number one thing holding back the universal access to sustainable infrastructure solutions is the siloed development and management of this infrastructure. And so I think to the extent that we can de-silo the different infrastructure solution companies and the way that they engage with each other, and the way that they work with the cities, and the way that they also deliver these solutions to the citizen, to the extent that we can de-silo that, not just through kind of standard integration, but really thinking about the interoperability of these systems and how they can grow from there. That gets really exciting, because in the last decade or so, at least for me, being a millennial, which means nothing now that the Gen Zers are taking over. But it's the social platforms were unbelievable in the way that they just created new worlds for us, right? In the way that they engaged people, pulled people in, and found those nuanced opportunities to build from things that we couldn't imagine if they remained in silos. That's what we're missing in the built environment. So being able to bring some of that magic of my era of Facebook, et cetera, and think about that in terms of democratizing sustainable infrastructure, that's by far one of the most exciting things for me.
Right. And what about you, Dane?
Well, I'm most excited about the electrification of transportation. Of course, that's self-interested, but it is one of the larger contributors to greenhouse gas emissions globally, and something that we all rely on in so many ways. Every single day, transportation is critical, of goods, services, and of course of people. So, the electrification of transportation is for me, the biggest sea change in our industry since we went from horses and buggies to automobiles. And I can't help but be excited about that. And obviously the greening of the electrical infrastructure itself and the greening of the grid in renewable energy is probably a close second for us.
Wonderful. And Jane?
I completely agree, Jessica. I wish there was one solution, but there isn't. I mean, it's really going to require multiple solutions. But I think I would call out the need for technological innovation. So exactly as you just said, Dane, we need the electrification of our fleet of trucks to be able to deliver on our commitment to zero emissions. So hopefully you can help us out with that one, Dane. We need low impact refrigerants to be able to deliver on that goal. So I think, and Jessica, earlier you mentioned, AI, there's also blockchain. I think there's multiple things we need from a technology perspective that are going to help us accelerate towards those goals.